Joc Pederson has been on a Bonzian tear. So what are the chances that he comes back in 2023? It's only a one-year deal for Joc. So we'll get to that question and so many others on today's mailbag edition of the show.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes, Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, a mailbag edition of the show. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. As usual, I won't be able to get to them all, but I'll save them for next time. So the first question comes from Kirkland Signature Giants fan, who says, what is the likelihood of Joc returning next year? And I think this is a question that is on a lot of people's minds right now. And the thing is, it's too early to tell. And so if you're asking me right now to put a number on the likelihood, I'm kind of like 50-50, maybe leaning towards him returning. And there's just a few things to mention about this. Number one, we're not talking about Kris Bryant. We're not talking about Buster Posey. We're not talking about Juan Soto, Aaron Judge, right? So even though the production has been very good offensively, it's still a limited profile to an extent for Joc Pederson because he has barely played at all against left-handed pitching. They made an exception after his 3-homer game, put him in the lineup against a lefty, and he hit a home run. So it's possible that if he just keeps hitting at a Bonzian pace, they'll throw him out there against some more lefties. But all in all, I think we're ultimately looking at a guy who's going to be a platoon player. And that just naturally is going to somewhat severely limit the cap on kind of the contract you're ultimately going to get. I look at a guy like Kyle Schwarber, who was coming off a very good year and ended up getting, 4 years, $79 million from the Phillies. So to me, that's like, for Joc Pederson, a best case scenario. If he basically has a monster season, keeps up this level of offense, granted in a platoon role all season long, and then also limited defensively, not a very good base runner either. So he's not fast, he's not a great defender, and he doesn't hit lefties. So there's like a cap on his value. And so, like I said, I think best case scenario for Joc Pederson in terms of his contract would be something like 4 years, $80 million. And that's a best case scenario. And so if he ends up in that kind of range, I don't think that the Giants would want to go there because, frankly, they believe they can get this type of production from the next Joc Pederson, who's coming off a down year for whatever reason, and you can get him like 1 year, $6 million versus 4 years, $80. When you think you can get the same type of production, it obviously is a no-brainer. And the thing is, we've talked about this a lot, but even a 4-year, $80 million contract has some risk, and that is a significant portion of your annual budget going to one player who he's had some down years recently, and so there's some risk there. But I think the more likely scenario is that he probably doesn't have the best case scenario type of year. Maybe, he cools down some, he gets hot some, but overall just another solid year. He's probably going to be in line for a multi-year deal if that's the case. He is only 30. This might be the last big contract he gets. He's probably just going to want to cash in as much as possible. Although I just read something, it was either from John Heyman or Joel Sherman for the New York Post, saying that the word is that Pederson took less money to come to San Francisco. And so I think there's a chance. I mean, he's from here. He grew up a Giants fan. I think he likes it here. Who knows? I mean, hitting here is not easy, and so maybe he wants to go somewhere else, but being close to home, I think he said he lives in the area in the off season anyway. So I think there's a strong likelihood that he comes back. The one exception being if he just has a monster year, I'm not sure they're going to want to be the team that gives him that Kyle Schwarber type of contract. Not because they won't ever give someone that type of contract, but I'm just not sure that a platoon player who's limited defensively, not a great base runner, is the exact type of guy. Like Tommy La Stella is similar. He's not a very good defender, not a very good base runner, but hits right-handed pitching really well. They gave him 3 years, $18.75 million. And I think that's a far more kind of reasonable deal for this type of profile. And so for whatever reason, I think Pederson would probably be in line to get more than that, even though, like I said, maybe they believe they can get that type of production. I mean, someone who stands out to me, this is a random thought, but thinking ahead to next year's free agent class, and I do want to do a show looking at the MLB trade rumors. They took a look at next year's free agent class and power ranked them. And I want to look at that list at some point soon because they just released this. But Brandon Nimmo of the New York Mets, just a couple years ago, I was enamored with Tommy La Stella, and they ended up signing him. And for me, Nimmo might be a guy that they really want to go after this offseason. He is going to be a free agent. And so maybe it comes down to choosing, because you've got Yastrzemski, you're going to have Wade, you're going to have Slater still, Ruff is still going to be in the mix. And so maybe there's not enough room for bringing back a guy like Pederson if you go out there and try to get a guy like Nimmo or Aaron Judge, who we'll talk about later as well. So anyway, I'm saying like 50-50 at this point, I guess, would be my thoughts on that. It's definitely possible that he comes back, but it's also possible he doesn't. Next question comes from Jesse, who says, what would be a way for Luis Gonzalez to stay up? I understand he's the guy who has options, but he seems to be one of our better regular contributors and apparently part of the Rookie of the Year conversation. It would be nice to see him stick. And so, unfortunately, I mean, you basically answered the question yourself, that unfortunately for him, he's the guy who has options. And however, right, there's always a however. And in this case, the however is that injuries are the way for him to stick. And right now there are injuries. And LaMonte Wade Jr. and Brandon Belt, I've heard a little bit less about, but LaMonte Wade Jr. is nowhere close to returning at this point in time. And basically, in order for Luis Gonzalez to be pushed out, both of those guys would have to come back, and nobody would have to get hurt in between. So there's a decent chance he stays pretty much all year, given that who knows how long Wade is out, and then by the time Wade comes back, who knows who else might be injured. Maybe Brandon Belt has another injury after he comes back. So there's all kinds of ways. Like, it was looking like there wasn't a direct path for him to come back at all. And then 4 days later, there was an injury. There's always an injury. There's always something. And so that is going to be his best shot. He is out of options after this year. And so you basically just have to wait until that's not the case anymore. And the reason, like, as much as it stinks in a lot of ways that you had to send him down, they really didn't have a clear alternative unless they were just willing to like trade Tommy La Stella just to avoid optioning Luis Gonzalez, which makes no sense at all. You're not going to lose a quality player just because you don't want to have to option a guy. It is a good problem to have too many quality players, and the guys who have the options get sent down. It's just the way it works. And next year, if he's still in the mix, and I mean, a la Estrada this year doesn't have options, and others, Mauricio Dubon, didn't have options either. And so they were on the roster. And if they perform, then they don't go anywhere. Wade Jr. doesn't have options either. And that's why he's never going to be sent down, because he can't be. And so he's on the roster until further notice. So next year, that would be the case for Gonzalez. I just must point out, okay, so he definitely has been a top performer, but there's all kinds of indicators to me that he's not going to sustain anything close to this level of performance. And it also must be noted that he has struggled defensively. I'm not saying he's going to continue to struggle, but as much as he's helped them with the bat, he's also hurt them with the glove. The average on balls in play is like 380, basically, which is going to come down. I'm not saying he can't be a guy who can have a high, above average on balls in play, but it's going to come down. There hasn't been much power. half of the home run output came against a position player, so I kind of disregard that a little bit. I like the player. I like the quality of the at-bat. I like how he competes in the batter's box. I like his demeanor in general. Seems like a major leaguer to me, but expect the production to get significantly worse, and I'd be interested to see where it ultimately lands with a much larger sample of plate appearances. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, we're going to talk about the starting rotation. Jakob Junis has established himself. What happens when Tony DeSclafani comes back? And what about Matthew Boyd waiting in the wings as well? So all of that in just a minute. But first, we've been asking, and Built delivered. Built granola bars are here. Built granola bars come in 3 unbelievable flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. Want to try all 3? You can get a mixed box at Built.com right now. These are different from the bars and puffs. Built granola bars are loaded with granola. It's the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness. But just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate. With 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar, Built granola bars will change your world. You can go to Built.com right now and get these Built granola bars. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, as promised, we are going to continue to get to some mailbag questions. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, recaps of MLB games with analysis from our local experts, taking fans through the season like no other network, free and available wherever you get podcasts. So yeah, the next question comes from Jose, who asks, DeSclafani or Junis? If Junis continues to perform like he has, do you think the Giants would keep Junis in the starting rotation, or can you see them trying out a 6-man rotation once Tony is back? And then Ethan's .data asks, how's Matthew Boyd doing rehabbing? So we're going to tie these two questions together because, I mean, this is a great question because actually it snuck up on me. The end of May is here, and Boyd would be eligible to come back in like just over a week, and he continues to be in the dugout all the time. But let's focus on Junis for now because he's been here and been pitching. He's made 4 starts. His 2 non-starts were relief appearances in which he went 6 innings, right? And so he's pitched 32 2/3 and has a 2.76 ERA. He's been, results-wise, one of their better pitchers. The peripherals are higher, but higher equates to about league average or a little better than league average peripherals. And so there's no doubt Matthew Boyd has been extremely valuable and helpful to the Giants when they've had some issues in their starting rotation, and DeSclafani getting hurt. Obviously not in the plans, but this is why you have to build depth in a major league season, and Junis has been valuable depth for the Giants. The thing is, he does continue to have minor league options, and so if DeSclafani comes back and is healthy, and if Boyd comes back and is healthy, Junis is a guy who can be optioned, and it would be similar to Luis Gonzalez, a very unpopular decision, but maybe a way that they end up having to do it to protect inventory. And so, I mean, they're not going to... DeSclafani obviously cannot be optioned. He's a major league veteran. He's got over 5 years of service time, and at that point, you just can't option a guy, even if they had options prior to reaching 5 years of service time. Whereas, like I said, with Junis, he does not. He entered the year with over 4 years of service time, so he's going to reach that point actually at some point this year, but I don't think he's reached it yet because it was 4 years and 16 days, and I think you have to reach 172 days for that next year to kick in. So he's far away from that. But, I mean, I could definitely see them going to a 6-man rotation. There's always, like, the guy who's underperforming could get an IL stint. Obviously, DeSclafani, we're talking about him coming back, so you're not putting him on the IL once you've brought him back. That's not what we're talking about here, but maybe Alex Wood could use a breather. He has not been particularly effective. I continue to believe strongly in Alex Cobb. The peripherals are so good, so good. We're not just talking, oh, they're better than his 6.5 ERA. They're elite, and the ERA is like one of the worst, so it's crazy. But they could totally go with a 6-man rotation. I think that the game is kind of trending that way anyway. They like to give guys extra days. And this Giants team has been very mindful of giving guys extra rest and making sure they're fully healthy and not trying to push them at all. And so we could see a 6-man rotation. But what about Matthew Boyd, right? What if Boyd and DeSclafani and Junis are all here and healthy? What are they going to do? Honestly, I don't know, but it is worth, like I said, pointing out that Junis can be optioned even if it would be unpopular. I think more likely one of these guys would move to the bullpen, probably Junis, who could fill a similar role where he could come in. I mean, he was following up an opener, so it was a little bit different. So it's tough to say. It's a good problem to have, but injuries often happen and end up resolving these questions before they need to be answered. Like maybe there's a setback with DeSclafani or something, or maybe Junis has a blister, or maybe Alex Wood has to go on the injured list, like I said. So in terms of Matthew Boyd, I'm trying to find him here and look at whether he has options. No, he has over 5 years of service time. So once he's back and ready to go, you would figure, I mean, they gave him a major league deal worth more than what they gave to Junis. The thing is about Junis, I must add, he is arbitration eligible still. So he can be brought back through the arbitration process next year. So this is already looking like a very strong signing. Next year, he won't be able to be optioned. But Matthew Boyd, they signed him for this year and this year alone for $5.2 million. And a lot of you probably he's not even on your radar at all. And so I apologize, Ethan's data, but I don't have the latest on Matthew Boyd. They have periodically sent out these updates, medical updates, and the word with Boyd is that he's just continuing to rehab. I haven't seen that he's on a rehab assignment or anything, so he's probably maybe a little bit further away than, let's see, we have an update from 3 days ago, actually, from Ethan Wiebeck of the San Jose Mercury News, who said that he's almost ready for live batting practice. So there you go. That sounds like he's probably at least about a month away, 3 weeks to 4 weeks away, maybe, because you do live batting practice and then you go out on a rehab assignment. They'd probably want him to make a few appearances at least in a rehab assignment before coming back. But he is a guy to pay attention to. He last year had a 3.89 ERA. A couple years before that, I mean, the peripherals were always strong with Boyd. He had a 30% strikeout rate in 2019. Home runs were an issue with Detroit, but he's the type of guy, there's a lot to work with there, and I think that he could be a big part of the pitching staff, a la Junis, but like second half Junis in the second half of the year. But the question about how to fit them all in is a good one, and I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do it. So we'll just have to find out together. Next question comes from Sportsman, who asks, are the Giants a legit destination for either Aaron Judge or Juan Soto? Which do you prefer? Which major league ace can the Giants land to bring swag to the starting staff? I'm not seeing answers. ... Don't know this like cryptic last sentence. I don't quite know what you mean. But are the Giants a legit destination for Judge or Soto? Well, they're different cases, right? Like Judge is a free agent at the end of this year. So he's a guy who's going to be, in those conversations. He's probably arguably perhaps the best free agent out there this offseason. He turned down a 7-year, $215 million extension offer from the Yankees prior to the season. So he's going to be looking for $250 to $300 million probably in the offseason, and he's already 30 years old. And so you're talking about a long-term deal for a guy who's 6'7", 282, according to Fangraphs here. And the thing is, he did grow up a Giants fan and in the area. And so for that reason, and given his sheer talent, I think that there's going to be rumors. He's going to be tied to the Giants, whether it's just a media ploy. I mean, like his agent, I think his agent is Boris. I'm not entirely sure who his agency is, but is he? I've said this before, but I don't ultimately see if he turned down 7 years, $215 million. I'm not sure he's going to be the guy that the Giants are going to finally make this huge splash for. Although the talent is there, I just worry about the aging of a guy who's that giant, essentially, and how the defense could break down as he gets older and into his mid-30s and even into the late 30s. Juan Soto is not a free agent for a couple of more years after that. Soto is a completely different case. He's only 23 years old right now. I believe he'll be 26, 27, I think, or 25, 26, one of those, when he reaches free agency in a couple of years. But when people have mentioned the Giants and linking them to Soto, they're often talking about a trade. And it's a very different animal when it's a trade, because you have to give up more than just cash. You give up your prospects. And so I don't necessarily know that they're going to want to do that. Like, the demand from the Nationals is going to be enormous. And we spent a whole show talking about this. I think that the Giants are in play for guys like this, though, essentially. But it's a very different case when we're talking about a guy who's a free agent versus a guy who you're going to trade for. Because, okay, look, when Soto reaches free agency, I think he makes more sense given what his age will be, if Soto ever reaches free agency. For Judge, the issue for me is the age and the likelihood that he wants a long-term deal at already starting from over 30 years old. Think about Albert Pujols, right? He's a Hall of Famer based on what he did before ever signing that contract with the Angels. Ever since he signed the contract with the Angels, that is still in effect, right? Aren't they still paying him this year? Or it was last year finally the last year, and then he got this 1-year deal with the Cardinals again. But it was a disaster, right? It was like a 12-year deal, 10-year deal, and it just was a disaster the whole time. And you just don't know how guys are going to age necessarily. So I would kind of maybe not expect Aaron Judge to end up with the Giants unless he was somehow willing to do a shorter term deal. Soto, I think, makes more sense. I would prefer Soto given the age and the great production. I mean, they're both great producers, but I think Soto has some questions defensively as well, though. So, I mean, Judge doesn't, but he might in the future, and Soto does now already, which is concerning to me. But they're both great players, and I think the Giants will be in those discussions. So coming up next, we're going to talk about Wilmer Flores. His contract is up at the end of the year. What is the likelihood that he is going to be back? So we'll talk about that and much more in just a second. But first, our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, as promised, I want to talk a little bit about Wilmer Flores, because his contract kind of quietly is up at the end of the year. And it ultimately did end up being a 3-year deal. It had a couple of club options in there. Or was it the third year was a club option? Regardless, he's been here since 2020, but that contract is up at the end of the year. Speaking of age, I mean, he's the same age as Aaron Judge right now. So when we talk about Judge, I don't know. I mean, 30's not old, right? But for Wilmer Flores, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have interest in bringing him back, except, and this reminds me of Donovan Solano, right? The production was still good, but they had like an heir apparent to take over that role in Thairo Estrada, who was going to be out of options. And so it didn't make sense to have them both on the roster. And so naturally, Solano didn't seem like he was going to come back, and he ends up signing with the Reds. And by the way, he hasn't played all year due to injuries. But for Wilmer Flores, I mean, do they have another guy who fills that role where he can move over the infield, third base, first base, second base, DH, and just produce with the bat and have quality at bats, not strike out, hit for power? I'm not so sure that they do, especially with Brandon Belt and Evan Longoria set to reach free agency. I think that he would probably continue to be a valuable piece. They do have a guy like David Villar, who maybe he's the type of guy who takes over that role, except Wilmer Flores is such an established guy. You absolutely know what you're going to get. from Wilmer Flores, and I'm not so sure that you can rely on that from a guy like David Villar, who's never yet played in the major leagues. You would have to get a good long look before you could make that determination. And so, especially with what I said, with those guys departing or set to reach free agency in Belt and Longoria, I think that Wilmer Flores is going to be a guy that they want to bring back at the end of the year. So I would put the likelihood at least 60%, but obviously whenever guys reach free agency, there's a chance they want to go somewhere else. There's a chance someone else on your team has established yourself as someone who can take over that role and maybe is a bit younger and more athletic. That's one issue with Flores, is not a great runner, not a great defender, and so do they want to maybe make an upgrade there in some way, somehow? But I would imagine that they'll have interest in bringing him back. There's really good value in the type. I mean, it was like a ultimately 3-year, $9.5 million deal, which I think is a pretty solid value for what he brings to the table. So if he's willing to take another similar type of deal, just kind of run it back, 2 years with a third-year option, $3 million a year, I could see both sides potentially being interested in that. When he came to the Giants, I remember him saying he really valued that they offered him a multi-year deal. And so I could see them doing that again. It's not like he's 36. He's only 30 at this point. So we'll see. But I could definitely see it. So last question comes from 1007, who says, prospect Casey Schmitt's potential. And I'm glad you asked. I think Casey Schmitt has come up a lot around Giants prospect land lately. He's currently in High A Eugene, where he's been a monster. He's got a 159 weighted runs created plus, 301 average, 375 on base, 531 slugging, only a 22% strikeout rate, walk rate over 10%, 7 home runs in 35 games. Everything I look at here is really strong performance, and yet that's not even the best part. The best part is the fielding. He's someone who is potentially going to be an elite third base defender. He was throwing 96 in college. He was a two-way player, hit and pitched, and was throwing 96. And he's always just been known as a great defensive player. And third base is a position where they don't have like a long-term solution. And Longoria's contract, like I said, is up at the end of the year. And so I think Schmidt's potential is very great. I think that just the floor of defense, if he can give you the type of offense, if he can have a 160 weighted runs created plus at the major league level, he's a superstar. But if he can give you good plate discipline, not a ton of strikeout, and just solid bat with some power and the great defense, that is the makings of a not just average player, but an above average player. And so I'm excited to watch his continued rise through the system. I think that he probably gets promoted to Double-A at some point this year, and then he's kind of in the mix not too long down the road. And so definitely good potential from Casey Schmitt. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. There were more questions I wanted to get to about Luciano, Harrison, David Villar, how they could fit David Villar onto the roster, but we'll have to save them for another time. Coming up on Monday, we're going to talk about this weekend against the Reds. I expect at least 2 out of 3. Anything less than 2 out of 3 would be a huge disappointment against this Reds team, and really a sweep should be possible. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how 45 games will have passed, and we'll look at some of the numbers for the Giants finally passing that critical kind of 45-game mark. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. Thank you so much for listening today. I can't wait to be with you again on Monday. Even though it is a holiday, we will be back with a show. So have a great weekend. Thanks again for listening. Stay Locked On Giants.